We are Fandom Roulette.
Two nerds with a passion for
History,
video games,
tabletop games,
and, well, really any nerdy stuff that comes into our lives.
While we might not be able to name every ship classification in Star Wars,
Or every Pokemon.
or every spell in the player's handbook,
Well, one of us can.
we're still here to have a good time.
Hey everyone, welcome to Fandom Roulette. This is Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And on Fandom Roulette, this is a podcast where we talk about a myriad of nerdy things, including such things as history, video games, tabletop role-playing games, and other nerdy things as we think about talking about them. So, this is a beginning of a bold new era. A new epic in history, if you will. So if you guys are normal listeners to the show, you'll see that we're kind of splitting them up into smaller bits now. I'm gonna probably have to repeat something. No, I'm just kidding. So this is going to be we're talking history in this here episode.
Yeah.
Basically, we're continuing along with my little, oh god, what's the word I'm looking for? My series about Greek mythology and how mythology can be used as a historic tool.
Yeah.
A piece of information that could be put alongside, the texts of other, other historians. So I just wanted to do a thing real quick. I don't know if I've done this yet, but there's actually a pretty big debate in history, and I might have said this already before, but it was from like the very early days of history when Greece was figuring out what history means. And there was a debate between two guys that you might have heard of called Herodotus, and also known as the father of history, and Homer. And for a very, very long time, Herodotus kind of won. Herodotus was a guy who basically made the argument that the only history that is valid is the history of the way things happened, exactly the way things happened. So Homer was like including stories of gods and goddesses and divine inspiration and things like that. And Herodotus was like, no, thank you. Did you talk to anyone who was actually there? And did you get their official accounts? And did you travel and see those places? But as we've moved along, historians have decided, and I think quite rightfully so, that those, not every single source has to be an exact account of the way things happen, that we can look at other things like, poems or art or novels or things like that, and use that information to kind of help inform us about the world that people lived in. So that's kind of why I've been doing this, and that's kind of been my thesis throughout this, is you can learn a lot about a people and what they valued and what they didn't value and what frightened them and things based on the stories that they tell. So that's kind of been my thesis for this here little section. So the last time we talked history, which was a while ago, we talked about gods and goddesses.
Yeah.
And kind of their domain and the idea that these gods and goddesses kind of helped to create order out of chaos. So I'm going to start off by weaving a little narrative.
What? I've never heard of this weaving. Are you a spinstress of lies now?
I actually have done spinning before.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Is it fun?
Well, I was using a drop spindle, which is actually the way that the Greeks and Romans would have done it.
Right.
Which is this whole thing where you take like a weighted wooden bauble and you spin it, and then gravity keeps it spinning, and then the wool starts connecting to itself. So the reason that the wool connects to itself is that it's if you go down to like the microscopic level, sheep's wool has teeny tiny little barbs on it. And if you get them all facing the same direction through a process called carding, those hooks will start to link together, which is why you can take sheep's wool and turn it into yarn, but you can't really take like human hair and turn it into anything, because our hair works differently and things like that. But anyway, that digression aside, so in the Cleveland Museum of Art, there is a statue that is called Apollo the Python Slayer. So this statue is about 4-ish feet tall. And like many statues of its day, it's missing some limbs. If you were to look into the case nearby this statue, there was a hand and a small oddly shaped creature that kind of looks like a lizard. I'm familiar with this statue because I worked at the Cleveland Museum of Art for some time, and this was one of the things that I would see on an almost day-to-day basis as I was working there. This statue is very controversial, and there's a reason for it. It's that it's believed to be a statue that was lost to history. So there is a couple of famous Roman statues that are made out of marble, which is a statue called Apollo Sarukantos, or Apollo Lizard Slayer. These statues are made out of marble, and marble is a lovely medium to work with, but it's very heavy, it's very dense, and sometimes it's difficult to work with. So if you were to look at these pictures, they have large tree trunks. They have Apollo without necessarily the same proportions as the one in the Cleveland Museum of Art, because the Greek statue that these artists based their statues off of was actually made out of bronze. That was originally in Greece. Now, bronze is a lighter material. It's easier to make things a little bit skinnier, things a little bit less weighty, and if you look at the accounts from the Romans who talked about the statue, they absolutely loved it. They talked about how it was a delicate portrayal of the youthful Apollo. They talked about how lifelike this statue was. And so the statue was for a very long time thought to be lost to history. Now, the curator at the Cleveland Museum of Art put in a lot of research into this statue and decided, or rather through research and observation and theorizes that this is actually the original piece, the one that it was based off of, that it was not actually destroyed, and that it was the original piece. So there's actually a lot of work that goes into this. You have to check the patina of things. There are ways to check the age of the metal to determine when it was created and things like that. But there's one big thing that kind of makes this statue and the pieces alongside of it controversial, which is the creature inside of the case. So in the Roman marble versions, this is turned into a fairly standard lizard. This piece, the Romans, as they looked at it, talked about how beautiful it was, but they couldn't get over the fact of this weirdly shaped creature. There were things about it that just didn't line up. The legs were irregular. The head was too small. The body was too lengthy. When they looked at it, they were like, that's kind of a weird-shaped lizard over there. And so they changed it into a good-looking lizard. The problem was that in this particular case, this was an example of the Romans not necessarily caring about the story that the statue was telling. They did not take this lizard or they did not take the Greeks' belief system whole cloth. Rather, they believed that the original artist Praxiteles had made a bad lizard. But what the artist at the Cleveland, or what the the curator at the Cleveland Museum of Art theorized through his research and looking at the statue and doing research about the area was that this was not actually a lizard. This was intended to be a creature that was known as the python. So in this case, this is Apollo slaying the python, a famous myth in Greek mythology. The python was a monster that lived at Delphi, which was considered to be the center of the world and the last remnants of Mother Gaia. But the python was also an agent of chaos, as were most mythical beings. So when they saw this lizard with limbs of different sizes randomly placed upon the body, they looked at it and they thought, this is just a badly designed lizard. But in reality, what they were seeing was this being of chaos, this agent of chaos that Apollo destroyed. So in a lot of depictions of Apollo slaying the python's quite large, sometimes almost depicted as a dragon, but he slayed this dragon, this python, and he brought order to the chaotic world of the python. And this was actually something that made him beloved by the Greek citizens. The Delphi, where the python lived, is considered to be one of the most sacred spots in the Greek mythological world. A person lived there who was the Oracle of Delphi, this famed soothsayer who could tell people the futures that they held. And so Apollo was the person who slew this agent of chaos, this physical embodiment of chaos, and instead gave order, gave control, and gave people the right and the ability to go and worship at the place of the python. So, if we were to look at Greek mythology as a whole, one of the things that always stands out to us is Greek monsters, right? I mean, like, let's think of some popular culture. So, in Harry Potter, it's filled with Greek mythological beasts. If you look at the Chronicles of Narnia, there are minotaurs and chimeras and other beasts that the children have to fight. For goodness sakes, I mean, I think we can talk about this. In Dungeons and Dragons, what did we fight a couple weeks ago?
We fought a chimera.
Well, that's interesting, Cody. It comes from Greek mythology.
What? I don't believe it.
So basically, as we look at them, in a lot of cases, these creatures were kind of taken and morphed into different things over time. And then to us today, they're just kind of seen as cool, right? I mean, there's things that we can slay in D&D, or they make good, bosses for video games or things like that. But to the Greek world, the existence of these monsters proved one thing: that Greece was order, that the Greek city-states were order, and that anything outside of Greece was chaos. Because that's where the monsters lived. If you were to go into the Greek city-state of Sparta or the Greek city-state of Athens or what have you, you weren't going to be seeing these creatures. In fact, the only people who really saw those creatures were people who went beyond the borders of Greece. And in many cases, they were probably just seeing like normal animals that they didn't recognize. But to them, these animals were considered weird and otherworldly, monstrous. So this helped to prove an idea that the Greek people came up with, which was that the Greek way of life was the superior way of life. And the only way that you could bring order to the chaos was implementing the civilization of Greek philosophy, Greek music, Greek democracy, things like that. It's almost as if the monsters stood for something greater. Curious then, huh? Really quick, I don't want to dwell too long on this, because if you look at Greek mythology, there are almost like two varieties of monsters. The first is there are a slew of monsters that exist for like out of karmic punishment. So the best example of this one is the Minotaur. Do you actually know the story of the Minotaur? Cody? It's a
Is
little.
this is the labyrinth one? Yeah.
This is the labyrinth one.
Yeah, that's about as far as I know. And someone used like string or something to try to get through the maze.
So basically, in the story of the Minotaur, I believe it was the king of Crete, insults Zeus in some way. And so basically, as punishment, Zeus makes his daughter, the princess, fall madly in love with a bull. And then Zeus is fucked up because the two of them do sleep together.
What?
And then, yeah, right? Yeah, it's messed up.
Big oof.
And then the Minotaur is born. So this was the king's punishment for denying the will of the gods, is that he was born with this half bull, half human monster that was forced to run around this. So he builds the labyrinth to keep the Minotaur occupied. But sort of the other main, so we also have monsters that were like children of the Titans. Those 100-armed men that we talked about, the Cyclopses were believed to be the children of the Titans, and in some cases, some people saw the Titans as agents of chaos as well. But then the other main one is the children of Echidna. I kid you not, there was a mythological character named Echidna.
Wait, you're telling me the Knuckles predates Sonic and is actually a Greek character?
But anyway, so yeah, Echidna was a half woman, half snake who birthed many of the monsters that we're familiar with. So she was responsible for Cerberus, the guardian of the gates of hell, the Hydra. She was the mother of Medusa. She was the mother of that bird that plucks out Prometheus's liver every night. We'll get to that one. Even the Chimera. And so the father of these creatures was considered by Greek mythology to be terrible and lawless, and his children were the same. You know, it was a beast that had, you know, multiple animal parts smashed together, or a beast who grew extra heads. That's not what's supposed to happen in an order or a world. Something dies when it stays dead. When something dies, it stays dead. There we go. That was the word of sentence I was looking for. But in Greece, law and order meant peace and happiness, and these creatures represented chaos, so a break in the order, and basically Greece wanted them gone. So people used these ideas to suggest the barbarity of the wider world. This idea that you don't want to leave Greece, you don't want to go further away than, you know, the trade partners that we already have, because out in those scary world, that's where you find the evil monsters and things like that. It was to suggest that the rest of the world was barbaric. And in fact, the word barbarian comes from Greek. It's a Greek word for mocking people who couldn't speak the Greek language, a language that they considered to be perfect and superior. In fact, when they heard it, they would basically just hear the people going bar, 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 bar. That's where the word barbarian comes from.
Big bummer.
So, I know, right?
Ugh.
So while they might not have necessarily used this for imperial reasons, although later they did use them for imperial reasons, but that's another point. That's a digression. It was designed to create a sense of superiority in the Greek people. So not only were they, you know, the best society that the world had ever made, that they created order and chaos and happiness, not only that, but they're heroes. Those stories of the people that they worshipped, the stories of the people that were fighting to defend them, were literally making the world a more orderful place. So to us, and this is kind of my wrap up, to us, the monsters of Greek mythology capture our imagination. They make us, you know, they are cool mishmashes of different things. It gives us something otherworldly to think about. But for the Greek world, not only were they real, but they were a threat to the way of life, and a threat to the order that they had built in the world. So, hey Cody, do you have any questions for me about monsters in Greek mythology?
Are there any stories of Like, are there, I guess, like, so today
Yeah.
we have, at least in the United States, we have a very warped idea of how certain events have taken place versus what actually happened.
Yeah.
Do we have any, or are there any stories that are kind of the reverse logic that come from there? Like, are there monster stories set in Greece that almost kind of tell us the exact opposite?
That's a good question. None that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, I mean, that would make sense to me if, like, if they want to keep a through line of, like, oh, Greece is the best. They're probably gonna hide or remove stories that would suggest otherwise.
Yeah. I think the closest thing I can think of is the story of the founding of Rome, the Aeneid.
Okay.
It's a Roman story. So that's the first thing to point out. But the protagonist of the Aeneid, whose name is Aeneas, is actually a person who is able to escape Troy after the end of the Trojan War. And then he goes on like an Odyssey-like quest. And then he is able to like basically like rise up and take, he rises up, he builds Rome, and then he's like able to take over Greece. That's like a very quick explanation of the Aeneid.
Sure.
But that's close I can think of. But yeah, no, in almost every case, like monsters were something that needed to be destroyed, or monsters were something that needed to be, or they were punished in some way. So like,
yeah, it was like a divine lesson.
Yeah. So like, for instance, I think like a good example of this is like, we all know the story of the Cyclops with Odysseus. Basically like the Cyclops breaks the laws of hospitality, which are divine laws. And he gets his eye stabbed out because, he was lawless and he was chaotic. And so that was literally fate punishing him for not following the rules of a good society.
Gotcha.
That's like so many Greek stories can boil down to like, and this is something we're going to actually be talking about, next week, I believe, or in, next episode. Yeah, there are so many stories that just like boil down to like, you broke this rule and you are going to be punished for it. So
sure. And then one last question.
Yeah.
Does Rome follow a similar trend, since they kind of #borrow a lot of stories? Like, do they continue that same through line? I'm curious.
I'm not quite as familiar with Roman mythology, which is kind of a bummer. I think mainly because it's like I was always told like, yeah, Roman mythology is basically just Greek mythology. So that's something I'm not aware of. That's something I can look up before next time to see like what this role was in like Greek or Roman mythology, if they had a similar level of monsters and things like that. So
yeah, because I know that Hercules and Heracles are basically the Greek and Roman versions of that same story.
Yeah, for sure. So like, yeah, that's just like that's like a perfect example of like the Romans were like, oh, this is a cool mythology, so like we'll just kind of take it, I guess.
Right.
So yeah, so actually saying Hercules is incorrect if we're talking about the Greek world, but
right, it would be Heracles for Greek. Right.
For the record, Hercules has a yes, it's Heracles. Hercules has like wild stories associated with them.
Well, yeah, he had to do like those 7 impossible challenges or whatever.
He had to do the trials, but like there was also like so full disclaimer, a smaller group of worshipers is during this time referred to as a cult. I mean, basically just like the word cult means like a small group of worshippers. So there was like this cult of Hercules that believed that they had discovered some like pool that he had either bathed in or drank from that had healing properties. And so like there were some people who saw Hercules as like a healer as well as a warrior and things like that. So
neat. And cult in Greek terms didn't have the same kind of negative, like weird, creepy vibes that we use cult-ish. The word cult today.
Yeah, I think that there was like a difference in terms. So,
yeah, different connotation there.
In fact, I think like you can even use cults. Like I think that sometimes early monasteries in the Catholic faith were referred to as cults as well. So like the cult of Benedict, and it was like Benedict and his group of followers. Then eventually that becomes like a monastic order. So
right.
And then it takes on the contemporary term of, yes, cults today are very much like, there's an implication when you say the word cult, which is why I kind of threw that disclaimer on there. So
nice.
Yeah.
I like it. I like the okay. This is like just like silly random question. In terms of how cool they look, favorite Greek monster?
Ooh, that's a good one. I like the Chimera. Always looks so dopey. The goat head just never works.
Yeah, it's true. Like you try to scare somebody, and it's like, but also I have a goat head, and it's like, oh.
I mean, don't get me wrong, goats. I would say, ooh, shoot. Harpies are always pretty scary.
Yeah.
But I don't like flying things because I don't like things pecking at my eyes. So.
That's a fair fear. I too am afraid with someone with a height advantage.
Yeah, it wigs me out. So.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to have the high ground. I'm looking at you, Ben.
Yeah. Ben. Oh. Yeah. What? Oh God. So anyway, so that was the history. Yeah.
I will answer that question too. I've always been partial to Medusa. I don't know if that's like the correct Greek term for it, but like the lady with the snake hair and can turn you into stone. There's always something so like fucking cool about that. And most of the depictions of her anyway are fucking rad as shit.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this concludes the history section of Fandom Roulette.
Yeah.
Or rather the history episode.
Yeah, that's what we'll call it. Well, the history episode.
Yeah.
For those of you who are following along, we're switching up our format a little bit to have little episodes, but don't worry, we will have links to the precursor episodes. If you're kind of jumping in at this moment, there are links in the description and wherever you pulled this from, so that you can listen to the last two episodes about the Greek gods. If you want more information about us, or want to keep more updated instead of these kind of bi-weekly episodes, you can go to our website at www.fandomroulette.com. You can follow us on Twitter at fandomr_podcast. You can send us an email if you'd like. If you'd want to send us a letter about how we mucked up something in this section or the next sessions ahead of this, at fanroulettepodcast@gmail.com. And if you are listening to this via SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, the podcasting section, please rate, share with a friend. And if you're on YouTube listening to this, because we are caught up on YouTube, which is super exciting. But if you are on YouTube, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, because apparently that's a thing that you got to do. And that's it for this episode. Stay tuned, because in a few days or so from here, you will be getting the rest of what would normally be an episode, but now we're splitting it up so you can pick the content that you want.
Yeah. And so, signing off for Phantom Roulette, this is Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And as always, stay nerdy.
Stay super nerdy.